There may be some who are not familiar with our tradition on personal anonymity at the public level. If so, we respectfully ask that no AA speaker or member be identified by full name or picture in published or broadcast reports of our meeting. The assurance of anonymity is essential to our efforts to help other alcoholics, and our tradition of anonymity reminds us that the AA principles come before personalities. Current announcements, if any, there aren't any. Introduce chairman or first speaker, as the case may be. Well, we're not going to do it the way it says in the program. We rehearsed it very carefully after breakfast this morning, and we decided that the way we're going to do it, Mac is going to start off. And Mac is your new General Service Trustee, Canada. You saw him last night. He didn't smile at one single joke.
Who are you?
Who am I? Well, want you read your program? You forgot your glasses. Oh! Jesus! This is an unruly bunch. I can see we're going to have trouble here this morning. Yeah. I don't know what's his name. I'm Tom. I'm an alcoholic. Good. So Mac will start off talking about big book meetings. Mac. I'm Mac Cheater, and I'm an alcoholic. And everybody tells me that I'm to take Tom's place, and I'm wondering when you're going to execute him. We plan on keeping him around for a while. A few years ago, Alcoholics Anonymous made a great discovery. Probably the most important thing that we've discovered for our welfare and the welfare of many to come is when we in Alcoholics Anonymous discovered Alcoholics Anonymous. We discovered the book. And it's really an amazing thing that it's almost like the book was just written. But when I came to this fellowship in 1956, we didn't use the big book the way we do today. We knew about it. Some of us had a copy. And the old-timers told us whenever we had a problem to go and read the book. But it wasn't used in meetings, at least in the country where I came from. And last night you heard Cease, my sponsor, defeated candidate for trustee. And Cease talked about how Aaron insisted that if he was going to chair the meetings, that they take the steps in order and not stop when a new member came, but keep on going. Because at that time, we used to stop whenever we got a new member and start over again. You could be in Alcoholics Anonymous for 5 years and never get past the third step. Ernie had quite a time getting sober, and he wanted to do something about this program, so he insisted that the steps be taken in order, and that you go right through and finish them, and then start over again. But the book that was used was a little red book. And about that time, I had the privilege of being a delegate for Saskatchewan. And I made a trip to Cleveland, Ohio, to visit a man who had brought the first book to Winnipeg, a non-alcoholic doctor who helped start Alcoholics Anonymous in the city of Winnipeg. And we discussed many things, and
At that time, when we traveled around the country, many people would ask us, what do you do to keep meetings interesting? How do you keep old-timers active? Why isn't Alcoholics Anonymous growing the way it should? And I talked to Brian about these things, and he told me a great thing. He said, sometimes if you want to go ahead, you have to go back. You have to go back to go ahead. And he suggested that we go back to the big book. That we go back and do things the way they were done in the early days. Shortly after that, I had the privilege of being one of the founders of a new group in the city of Regina. And we adopted the plan of action that Ernie and Cease and the boys in Prince Albert had started. But we switched it to the big book. And we started at the beginning, at the index. And we went through the book, page at a time. And we made a commitment to each other that we would take each step. And that meant everybody. And there was a couple of us that had been sober for a while, and we thought we'd done everything, and we got trapped. And when we got to the fourth step, we had to write it out again. And when we got to the fifth step, we had to make an appointment and go and do the fifth step over again. An amazing thing happened. You see, some of the members of our new group had been in Alcoholics Anonymous for some time. One particular chap had been in Alcoholics Anonymous for 8 years, but he hadn't had a year's sobriety. An amazing thing happened. He never drank. He stayed sober. And we discovered that by doing this, people could stay sober. It didn't matter how long they'd been around. That if they took the steps from the big book and did them to the very best of their ability, it would no longer be necessary to take a drink. And one chap who has done this was a doctor who was 23 years in the fellowship and not sober a year. And all he did that was different was he did the steps out of the big book. And we discovered another thing. We discovered that this is a program of recovery. That you can recover from alcoholism. That this was not a legacy of sobriety, but a legacy of recovery. Many people seem reluctant to accept the fact that you can recover in Alcoholics Anonymous. And we hear people say they're recovering, and they're recovering, and they're recovering. I had the privilege to sit beside Bob E. last night from Akron. His dry date is 1936. I think he's about as dry as he's ever going to get. I would think that that gentleman has recovered. So why do we have to be superstitious about this thing? Why can't we tell people that you can recover in Alcoholics Anonymous? The greatest news there is in the field of alcoholism is that there is a program of recovery in Alcoholics Anonymous. and it is the only one there is. And all the other outside agencies, and they're doing a fantastic job, and they're sending a lot of people to Alcoholics Anonymous, but this is where it's at. The big book gives us a choice. It says those who do not recover are people who cannot or will not completely give themselves to this simple program. I believe I qualify to say I've recovered because I have completely, to the best of my ability, given myself to this simple program. I'm yours, such as I am. So you have a choice. If you haven't recovered, then you're saying that you cannot or will not completely give yourselves this simple program. Take your choice. But I think it's important. The greatest need we have in Alcoholics Anonymous today is more recovered people in Alcoholics Anonymous. It's a sad thing to see people who are only half here. When they're talking about alcoholism in industry, they refer to the half man, to the person who is at work but isn't at work. And we have people in this fellowship who are only half here. They have paid the price to be here. But for some reason or another are not able to take what is here. And if you do nothing else after this conference, go back home and take the big book and take the steps the way they're written in that book and do the things that we're told to do. And take what is yours. Take what you have paid the price to have. Because the sad thing is there are no refunds. If you don't take it, it's just gone. And everything that you could desire in life, the peace of mind and contentment and happiness that is beyond your wildest dreams is available. And you've paid for it. Every person that comes to the door of Alcoholics Anonymous is paid for it 10 times over. So why not take it? Right at the beginning of the book, it tells us. To show us precisely how they recovered. I belong to a group called the Golden Slippers. Because there are people who come to Alcoholics Anonymous and by a strange coincidence they drink again. Sometimes we get so pious in our sobriety we forget that alcoholics sometimes drink booze. And a guy or a gal that's having a little trouble will go to a group for a while and pretty soon they don't pay any attention. And maybe as a last-minute thought, they'll say, well, Tom, what do you got to say tonight? And it doesn't matter what the hell Tom says. Everybody knows he was drinking last week, and they don't pay any attention to him anyway. And yet we'll drive 50 miles to make a 12-step call on some guy we don't even know. And the next morning we'll, over coffee, tell everybody, got a many great 12-step call last night. I drove 50 miles. But some guy that's sitting in your group who drinks a little booze, He phones up at 3 o'clock in the morning and say, well, you know where it's at? You know where the group meets? And sometimes we say the cruelest words there are in the language. We say he hasn't suffered enough yet. Isn't that something? We sit there in our pious sobriety and say he hasn't suffered enough. When he's suffered enough, he'll come back. And that's how our group started. Two guys that couldn't stay sober. One of them called me on Friday night. And the next night, the second guy called. And he said, Mac, I hate to bother you, but I phoned everybody else I know and nobody will come. Well, the first guy, I phoned him up. I said, Ross, come on, we got to make a 12-step call. And we went over to see Cliff. And we started a new group, the Golden Slippers. And Ross was our secretary. It was about a year and 9 months before Ross got sober, but he was the best secretary you ever had in your life. As a matter of fact, I don't think he's as good now that he's sober. And people said, what are you letting him handle the money for? He's drinking. Well, can you think of a better reason to handle money than when you're drinking? Like a guy told me years ago, this isn't the ladies' aid. And Cliff is in a drying out joint right now. And by golly, we're hoping this will do it for him. And sometimes in our group, it's like picking up a handful of water. But we're starting to spend some money on birthday cakes. So that works. And I'm going to introduce a gal to you now who's cost our group a little money for 2 birthday cakes. But she's a member of the Golden Slippers, and I'm proud to be her sponsor. And she's going to tell you what's happened to her. And part of this program this morning is supposed to talk about sponsorship. And Tom and I aren't going to talk about sponsorship. We're just going to show it to you. So I'm going to ask Janice to come up and tell you what's happened to her in this program. Thank you very much.
Hi, everybody. My name is Janice Downey, and I'm an alcoholic. Now, I'm a member of the Golden Slippers group that meets at 8:30 on Sunday mornings at the Viscount Motor Hotel in Winnipeg. 2.5 years ago, I was living in a flop house. I lived on the 3rd floor, and I was a charity case. I'd left high school as one of the girls most likely to succeed, no doubt. I was vice president of the student council, and I played a violin, and I played it well, and I was athletic, and I was involved in everything, and I was a goer, and I was an accomplisher and an achiever. I went into training to become a nurse, and I felt strange feelings, often. I felt very alone and very isolated and very wondering about what life was all about. I couldn't seem to make any sense of anything. I met a young fellow who introduced me to rum and coke, and I liked the rum and coke so well I married the lad. And 3 years later, I wrote this poem that I want to read to you tonight, because I don't particularly remember reading the poem. I found it in a book, folded away and hidden away just within a year. And I can't get over how how well it sort of, I don't present it to you for any poetic value, that's for sure, but how well it describes the sickness that had occurred and the feeling problem that I developed because of alcoholism. It goes like this. Each of us owns an island called despair, where creeping doubts swing from the twisted trees and bones of ancient sins crack underfoot. Mad, mocking laughter comes with every breeze. Each sought-out refuge is a stinking lair where noisome things nibble a rotting shoot. When we are ill or tired, we voyage there, landing on burning sand with heavy heart. The hopeful mainland from these shores so far, so glorious shines, yet stands so far apart. There is no escape. Sharp circle needs a sea. There is no use in planning how to flee. When so much pain and fear comes with each breath, small wonder those who live here welcome death. Well, I read that now, I just can hardly believe, because I had at one time been a pretty well-adjusted and pretty active young lady. 3 years after I wrote that poem, I was in the charitable institution, desperate, frantic, separated from my family and friends at Christmas time, nowhere to go, no one inquiring after me, no one concerned, so I thought, in what would happen. I want to tell you a little story about when I used to play violin. I practiced very hard, and I tried very hard to play that right, and it was important to me to be technically correct when I played it. And I practiced hard, and I practiced long, and I became quite good at the violin. The year I left high school, I went to join the Winnipeg Symphony, and I wasn't good enough, really, for them. And at least I felt I wasn't. And I remember that I went home and I put my violin in its case, and I put the case in the attic, and I have never to this day touched that violin again. And the reason I tell you that story is that when I was living on the third floor of that house, I wished that I could put myself in its case and put it away, put it in the attic, and just leave it be. I wanted no more, just no more of this trouble and pain. But wishing for those things and hoping for them doesn't make it happen. And things continued and was carried on. And I was drinking in the morning in my office. I used to pour myself some vodka and add a teaspoon of instant coffee to it and mix it up and call it coffee. And that was my morning coffee break, and I needed that. That was medication. It took the lump out of my throat and the panic out of my heart, and I needed that. And I knew it, and I knew that that was a bad sign, and I knew that things were getting worse so fast I could hardly even know what to expect the next day. To make a long story short, one morning I was in my office and I was frantic, and I don't know whatever possessed me, but I locked the doors and pulled the blinds and sank to my knees and asked for help. I had no idea in the world what was the matter with me, really. And I made arrangements that I would go anywhere and do anything to become well. And I also made arrangements that I needed some help. I needed somebody, some person, something that would teach me what to do. Teach me what to do next, and then next, and then next. And the final part of that arrangement was that if something doesn't happen in 10 days, I'm going to have to do away with myself. I have 10 days. You have 10 days. No more. I struggled around and I became very agitated in my office, and I went upstairs into the terminal of the airport. And I thought I saw a pair of shoulders that I recognized. I thought I knew that person in the crowd. I didn't really know from where, but I stopped, and you have to understand that it had been 8 years since I had approached anybody, since I had presented myself and introduced myself to anyone. I had avoided everybody that I recognized up until that point in time. And I saw this pair of shoulders, and I walked towards him, and all of a sudden he stopped and walked towards me, and we met, and I said, "My name is Janice Downey, and I think I know you, maybe from Alcoholics Anonymous." And Max said, "Yes." And he introduced himself, and he said, "Would you like a cup of coffee?" And we went upstairs to the coffee shop, and I told him about some things that had been going on in my life and some difficulties, and I had these friends who kept telling me that I was maybe alcoholic, and I didn't know why they would speak to me in that fashion, because that was a very rude thing to say to a nice girl like me. And I was very hurt and very wounded, and And I would tell him some of these things, and he came back to see me another time. And then he came back to see me another time in my office. And we would go to coffee, and we would get talking about things, about feelings mostly, about hurt feelings and funny reactions to things when we were kids, and the fact that we'd always felt different as children in the family than the others did. And I told him about how when I was a little girl I thought maybe I should have been a carrot instead of a person, because carrots were underground and safe, and nobody bothered them and paid much attention to them. But somebody, and it was not possible for me to use the word God at that time, but somebody had played this terrible trick on me and had made what should have been a carrot a little girl. And it was all a mean, practical joke, and I couldn't manage. And we would get into the darndest conversations in that coffee shop, and finally, well, I want to tell you one experience because Cecil's here. But one evening he asked me to come, Mac asked me to come and meet his sponsor, Cecil. And we went to this hotel room. And I was to meet Cecil, and he and Mac were chatting away and talking away about things I knew nothing about. For some reason or other, I started to tell them a story of something that happened to me when I was a little girl. And, well, I'll tell you the story. It's a simple thing. And what it involves is that I was born in London, Ontario, and we moved to Winnipeg when I was in grade 1. And I started into grade 1 at a brand new school with brand new kids. And they did things a little differently than I was aware of them in kindergarten in Ontario. And I went to school, and I really liked it, and I went every day, and I was real enthusiastic, but I lost my heart for it very suddenly, and I wouldn't go to school anymore. I just wouldn't go to school. And my mother was very upset, and she couldn't seem to force me, and my father finally came home from a traveling trip, and he took me by the hand and struck me off to school. And when we got about 6 steps from the door, he said to me, "Now, Janice, why won't you go to school? Tell me." And I confided in him for just a minute, and I said, "Dad, every day they call the roll, and all the kids say present, and I never get one." And many times people had laughed at me and I'd been the butt of many jokes in the family about that story, but it had hurt my feelings so badly. And when I told them this story, Cecil moaned. And all of a sudden, I just had a feeling that, these people know what I'm feeling. They know what I'm having trouble with. He didn't laugh at me. And I was so excited about this when I was going home that evening. I was telling Mac, he knew what I was talking about, didn't he? He knew. Because everybody else had laughed and had made fun of me and teased me about these funny feelings of mine and the way I sort of cracked up over things that other people thought were humorous, or the difficulty I had facing things that other people found simple. Anyway, Mac said that he was going to start a new group of Alcoholics Anonymous, in the sense that they weren't long-time members of the group. And we would start at the very beginning of the program, very beginning of the steps, and work our way through it, day by day, page by page, and we would go at the pace of the slowest person present. We would go just as fast as the slowest person could go. And we started into all of this business. This really intrigued me, this idea of being, brand new and in a new group and whatnot, and I was kind of afraid that they wouldn't let me in because I hadn't had a slip. Well, I hadn't been sober yet, but I was afraid. Anyway, we started. And I came to understand a little bit about what alcoholism is. It was much different than what I'd thought. I guess I had a notion that people who were alcoholic enjoyed drinking and liked to drink. I never did. I always drank for medicinal reasons, and I always knew what the effect was that I wanted, and it wasn't to have fun. I never tried to have fun. Sometimes that happened. It was a byproduct, but it never was the point of having a drink for me. And I learned about this business of an obsession of the mind and analogy of the body, and that was the first thing I'd heard in 8 years that made any sense to me. I'd been trucking all over town, looking for an answer to the problem of the pain. And somebody in the book had written down what the nature of the problem was, and I was dumbfounded. I was astounded. I was surprised to find out that that's what the real nature of the problem was, as I was when Mac told me that I had to start by stopping drinking. You start by stopping. I thought that you did a whole bunch of things and went through a whole bunch of mental gymnastics and psychological hopscotch, and then you quit drinking. But it didn't turn out that way. You quit drinking, and then you did the steps, and you got well. And that just blew my mind. I can remember saying, you mean you stop? You just stop? I just didn't. You start by stopping. That was so incredible to me. And then we talked about an unmanageable life, and I thought of those days back in high school and whatnot when I had such high ideals and such high motives, and I had such big plans for myself. And although they weren't big plans in lots of senses, I always had felt that there was going to be some purpose to life, and that I was going to make a contribution, and I was going to do particularly good things with life. And I was so optimistic about it, and I thought of how things had turned out and how unable I had been to manage things in any kind of a fashion at all. It wasn't hard for me to accept. Step 2 was difficult for me because I got all hung up on whether it was sanity or insanity, and who was and how much were you and how much did you have to be, and all this sort of baloney, until I was informed that the step is really talking about the power of God. It's not talking about whether you're sane or insane or how sane you should be or what sanity is at all. It's asking you to believe that there is a power available to human being people that can penetrate into their lives and heal them. And I still stop and say, is that really true? Is that true? Could that happen? And I developed an idea that the course of these steps, the rest of this program, was going to help me make myself available to that power if it was there. And there was a certain exercise I had to go through and certain things I had to do in order and in a fashion so that I could become available to that power. And we made the decision, and we did step 3, and we did step 4, and then I went to see Bruce Miles and to do my step 5. And I was in his office 4.5 hours one evening, just telling him things that just had happened. And the pain I felt, and the anger I felt, and the rage I felt when I was telling him about it, I can feel today. Just thinking about it. I just fell apart. It just came out and came out and came out, and I couldn't stop it. That evening I went home to do my steps 6 and 7, and for one insane evening, I really had a hard time making the decision to carry on with the rest of this program. I really had a hard time wanting to let go of those resentments and those fears and those sex problems, because they had kept me less vulnerable, I thought. I thought I was less vulnerable if I hated. And to kneel and to say the words of the Step 7 prayer, my Creator, I am now willing that you should have all of me, good and bad. I pray that you now remove from me every single defect of character which stands in the way of my usefulness to you and to my fellows. Grant me strength was the hardest thing I ever did in my life. It just broke me. I had cultivated and nourished those problems and those defects to the point where they were so much a part of me that to give them up was like tearing off my skin. I made the amends I was supposed to make, the ones I was aware of, and one of the things that I was very aware of when it came time to worry about steps 8 and 9 was that I could remember in technicolor every injustice ever done to me, but I had a rather hazy picture of what it was I might have done to others. We continued to take personal inventory, and when we were wrong, promptly admitted it. One of the difficulties I have with living is that I tell lies. I tell a lie when a truth would do. It just comes out, it's natural. It's out, and I've said it, and it's not even a very serious one, and it's not a particularly malicious one. It doesn't set anybody up for anything, but it's a lie, and it confuses me. Confuses a lot of people. And so when I'm wrong, when I do those things, particularly with lies because I'm so aware of them, when I tell a lie, I go through all of the steps. And I make myself aware of it, and I admit it to myself, to God, and to another human being who is usually my sponsor. And I tell him, oh, I told another lie today. And he doesn't even usually ask me what the lie is about. I know that then I have to straighten things out, make an amend if it's appropriate, and immediately try to switch my mind into doing something for somebody that might help them out a little bit. And the lies subside, and the lies are going away, mostly because I can't bear to have to confess them myself. But they're going away. I don't tell lies nearly as much as I used to, and they don't come just naturally. It wasn't a thinking process that I went through. They just, bloop, out they came. It was a lie. Sought through prayer and meditation. This is a very difficult step for me. When I did step 3, I had such a sense of, and I will have no other gods before me. Mother's opinion would be mother's opinion, and husband's opinion would be husband's opinion, and society's values would be society's values. But I had just turned my will and my life over to the care of God. And at that particular time, there also came to me as such a sense of, this is my legacy. This is my inheritance. I stake my claim on anything that I could have in Alcoholics Anonymous. I will have all I can have. It's mine. That's my book. That's my program. Those are my steps. That's my group, my meetings, my feelings, my position is in Alcoholics Anonymous. But it was still difficult for me to understand what was meant by prayer and meditation. I was so spiritually ill when I came to Alcoholics Anonymous that I could not say the word God. I could not say prayer and meditation. And so for quite a period of time I would do my thing in the morning. And I pondered over this a long time, tried hard, tried to understand it. And finally came up with the idea that the best way to ask for knowledge of His will for us and the power to carry that out is to say the words of the Step 3 and the Step 7 prayer. That they have said it for us already. And so each morning I spend time and I say those prayers, and the Serenity Prayer, and sometimes the Lord's Prayer. And sometimes I ask for strength, inspiration, and direction concerning specific problems that I'm having. I think that knowledge of His will for us means knowledge of His will for us as individuals, certainly. But also it might mean knowledge of His will for us as in relationship with other people. Us as in the two of us, or this group of us. Knowledge of His will for us may mean knowledge of His will for our group that meets on Sunday mornings, or of our whole society of Alcoholics Anonymous in Winnipeg. And then, of course, as you travel, it gets bigger and bigger and bigger. And there's some purpose to this. There's some purpose there. It must be. It's obvious. When I first met Mac, and I used to go around and hear him talking at meetings, he would talk about recovery. And I just got so turned on by this idea of the possibility of recovery because I had only tried to endure a little longer. Somehow make myself get through the day. I don't know if I can make that clear to you, but there was such a distinct difference in my mind between what I thought Alcoholics Anonymous was and from what he said it was. It had just never occurred to me. I thought we were going to separate ourselves and go into the secret society and live underground and tolerate each other and look after each other when we got sick and endure each other a little longer and just somehow make it through the days floundering around, never knowing what you were doing. And it wasn't too attractive to me. But when he started to speak of recovery, I just got so excited. I just thought, is that possible? Is that possible? And in my reading, I came to what Bill described in 12 and 12. And I'm going to skip books here on us for just a minute, because this just grabbed my imagination so much. I always reckon that I have two sponsors in Alcoholics Anonymous. One is Mac, of course, and the second is Bill Wilson. Because I just assume that he left that message for me in that personal letter called Alcoholics Anonymous, a big book, and it's my book. And it's my message from him about how to deal with my problems, myself, my difficulties, my feelings especially. And the answer to all the questions that I'd had in my mind for so long. This is how Bill described recovery. At least in my mind, this is what he was saying. He said in step 12 of the 12 and 12, service gladly rendered, obligations squarely met, troubles well accepted or solved with God's help, the knowledge that at home or in the world outside we are partners in a common effort, the well understood fact that in God's sight all human beings are important, the proof that love freely given surely brings a full return, the certainty that we are no longer isolated and alone in self-constructed prisons, the surety that we need no longer be square pegs in round holes, but can fit and belong in God's scheme of things. These are the permanent and legitimate satisfactions of right living for which no amount of pomp and circumstances, no heap of material possessions could possibly be substitutes. True ambition is not what we thought it was. True ambition is the deep desire to live usefully and walk humbly under the grace of God. Thank you very much.
Ain't she something? All right. Well, I don't belong to the Golden Slipper group, Golden Slipper. I just belong to the plain, ordinary, everyday Thursday morning sippers, I guess. I belong to the Tiger Group. And of course, there are some of them here. Those are the quiet ones you hear out there. And we're a very humble bunch. But like Mac, we got a lot of this, of course, from Mac. And from some of the things he was doing some years ago, we initiated a similar big book program in our group. This had come out of the fact that I had noticed in our group that we had a number of people who seemed to have a great deal of difficulty staying sober. That is, continuously sober, with any degree of happiness, with any degree of contentment at all. So I went to the committee and asked them if they would give me permission to hold a meeting, a step meeting. They would not permit me to hold it in the club room, in the meeting room, but there was a little cloakroom at the front, and they said, if you like, you could meet there at 8 o'clock on Wednesday. We think you wouldn't upset the group too much. So we started there on Wednesday night, and at that time I didn't have any clear idea of the recovery program as it is presented in the book, which seems rather strange because I'd been sober myself for quite a number of years at that time. But I determined to get the steps going, and I used everything I could, grapevines, big book, 12 and 12, whatever was available, and we went through the steps, and I discovered some things. I discovered, for instance, and I'll never forget this particular evening, I had picked out 8 guys in the group who were having a lot of trouble. One of them was a great big chartered accountant, 6'4", I guess, 230 pounds, something like that. Hell of a guy, but he couldn't stay sober. And when we went through step 3, we went through step 3 exactly, precisely, as it is set out in the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous. And when it came to the step 3 prayer, I had little cards printed up with that prayer on it. And I gave each one of my 8 fellow members a copy of this prayer. And I recall so clearly because we do these steps together. We share them, and we share that experience. And when it came to that, Bob said to me, are we going to do this? And I said, yes, we're going to do it. He said, are we going to read this? And I said, yes, we are. He said, you mean out loud? We're going to say this out loud? And I said, yes, we are, because that's what the book says, that we will do it out loud, voicing it without reservation. And he stood up, and he was as white as it's possible to be white and still be alive. And his hands were shaking, and he said it. We went through it, we did it, and afterwards it was a real euphoric feeling for him. He acted as though he'd had a couple of drinks, you know. He was laughing, and he was so excited, and it was great. We had a long discussion after that. But, you know, something happened. He hasn't had a drink since that night. And that gave me such a boost, such a charge. It gave me such a direct example of the power in this program that I couldn't get over that. So then, as time went on, we eventually got permission, and we got a Sunday morning meeting started, and we started sharing the book. And one of the guys that sat in on that first step class a few years ago is George, and George is with us this morning, and I would like George to share his story with us now. George, thank you very much.
Well, it was read out this weekend that Alcoholics Anonymous is a fellowship of men and women who share their experiences, hope, and strength. And I guess that's what I'm up here for, is to share myself with you people. So if you let me do that, we're going to get along just fine. And if you don't, we're still going to get along just fine. Because I don't fight anymore. And I guess that's cooperation, I don't know. But before I go on, I'd like to say hello to all of you. And I'd like to tell you that I'm George. And I'm an alcoholic. And I was just kind of thinking when I was sitting there, you know, that getting drunk wasn't all that bad. Because our book tells us that. It says that if you be alcoholic like I am, that we all get a certain sense of ease and comfort. That comes at once, by taking a few drinks. And when I look back, I can recall this. Where once I had a few drinks, you see, I always had a hard time in between drunks. But once I take a few drinks, by God, I got better looking. And I could talk with such ease. And if the right opportunity presented itself and she wasn't all that bad looking, God, I'd even try to be of service sometimes. But getting sober, that wasn't so pleasant. And we all got to get sober. Usually I have to get sober after maybe 6 or 7 days of drinking. Or I would wake up in the morning and I'd be sleeping on the couch because my wife didn't want to have too much to do with me then. And I'd have this old blanket and I'd be sweating and liquor was just coming out of me. And if I'd take that blanket off, well, I'd start shivering and I'd have to curl up on the couch and I'd put the blanket on and I'd start sweating again. And eventually I'd get up and I'd start gagging and heaving. And I'd maybe crawl to the toilet and I'd bow in front of the American Standard and I thought my guts were going to come right out and my eyes were watering and I'd be pounding my fists against the wall. And I can remember my little boy coming in and looking at me and saying, "What are you doing, Dad?" I guess I could have looked at him and said, "Getting sober, son." Getting sober. You see? So getting sober ain't all that much fun, I don't think. You know, I don't know how we get to Alcoholics Anonymous. I'm not much of an expert on that. I guess I was just tired of suffering, and I was just tired of dying. And I went to Alcoholics Anonymous, and I went to the Tiger Group. And there I met a bunch of fellas and a bunch of gals that I could identify with. And we became friends. I guess what I'm trying to say is that at first I stayed sober on the fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous, on you people. But the Tiger Group, being the kind of group it is, they don't let you do that too long. And they started talking to me about the big book, Alcoholics Anonymous, and they told me to pray. And you know, it ain't all that hard when I look back. Our book says that George, well, it doesn't say George, but it says... It says, do you now believe? And I don't know if it's all that important if we believe or not. But it says, are you even willing to believe that a power greater than yourself can restore you to sanity? You know, being the kind of drunk that I was, where I'd run out of money and I'd run out of people and I'd run out of excuses and everything that there was to run out of, what choice did I have but to believe and be willing? What choice did I have? Today, the insanity of alcoholism to me is self-thinking. I'm convinced that anybody that gets drunk can only be thinking of one thing, themselves. And that's what I have to ask God to relieve me from. The third step, I guess the most discussed step in Alcoholics Anonymous today, everybody talks about step 3. And I've heard many ways of doing it, thousands. But it was pointed out to me that there was only one way to do it, the way that the book tells me to do it. It says the first requirement being that I be convinced that any life run on self-will can be a success. And if I look back, believe me, I didn't come to Alcoholics Anonymous because I was a success in the game of living. It says that selfishness and self-centeredness was the root of all our problems. I had to come to Alcoholics Anonymous to find out that I wasn't the end to everything. That you people can get along quite well without me. And it says that I had to quit playing God. Or I had to quit trying to change this world and make it an okay place to be in. I had to quit doing that. And then they have a little prayer there. And I'm not going to read it to you because you all read your big books and you all know what it is. They have a little prayer set out for me so to make it a little easier. And we talk about action in Alcoholics Anonymous, and the book goes on to, gives me a chance to take a little action. As Tom mentioned out, it says that we take this step, and we found it very desirable to take this spiritual step with an understanding person, such as our wife. The best friend or spiritual advisor. Oh, well, if you don't want to take her with your wife, okay, but why not your sponsor? I can't think of a more understanding person. Step 4 says that liquor was but a symptom. We had to get down to causes and conditions. I think the book means the causes that are going to get me to drink again. The condition, I think the condition that I'm in today, if I were to do a 4th step today, I'd look at the condition that I'm in today. And it's also there that it says that, you know, I kind of do things backward. I found out in step 4 that it's there that it says that first we get well spiritually. And then it says we will straighten out mentally. And then we straighten out physically. To me, physical sobriety is the kind of sobriety that you have when you feel good right here. That good feeling inside, that's physical. I can remember being sober and getting all worked up and dropping 15, 20 pounds. Well, that ain't physical sobriety. You know, it's when you feel good right here. And I did a step 5, and I admitted to God, to another human being, and myself. And we used to have a kind of people, and I don't know if we still have them or not, but we used to have a few fellows around our group that would tell us, newcomers, that, step 4 and 5 was something that you shouldn't hurry into. That you should be around maybe 4 or 5 years before you do that, you know. And that's good, I guess. But when I hear that today, I only have one answer for these people. Bullshit. Bullshit. You see, I did a step 5 when I was about 4 weeks sober. I don't know if it was a good one or a bad one, but it must have been good enough because I'm still here today. And I've done a few since. And the ones that I've done since, I did exactly the same thing. I just did it as well as I could. You know. And page 75 in our big book tells us that if we do step 5, certain things are going to happen. It says the feeling that the drink problem has disappeared will often come strongly. And by God, I don't remember having that feeling since I done that first 5th step. So this is one thing that worked for me. And I've become willing, and the only reason I've become willing to let God remove my defects of character is because I'm tired of suffering. I don't try to control them, and I don't work on them. I'm just willing to let God remove them. In step 7, Janice pointed out there's a little prayer. And it was amazing for me to discover that I go to God the way I am. It's just good and bad. You know, I don't have to wait till I'm all lily white and pure before I can go to God. He's going to take me just as I am. And that's just great. And this is where I kind of make it all right with my Creator. And he says, all right, George, if that be the case, it's okay, but why don't you make it right with your fellow men? You see, there's a condition there. If I want to be of any use to anybody, I have to make it right with all my fellow men. And I had to forgive all the people that had harmed me while I was drinking. You see, alcoholics, we don't have a monopoly on hurt. Sure, we hurt people, but we get hurt as well. And I had to forgive all the people that had hurt me. And I had to go out and make amends. And then the book goes on that if we do these first 9 steps, certain things are going to happen. I think the book tries to describe to us what our AA way of life should be like. It tells us what the results are going to be. The causes being the first 9 steps. And it starts off by saying something that we don't like to read. We like to read the nice part of it. But it says, if we are painstaking about this phase of our development, and I like that word, painstaking. Believe me, when I went out to make amends, it wasn't an exercise in humility that I was doing. It was just downright humiliating. And if you're a kind of alcoholic like me, I got to Alcoholics Anonymous and I owed more money than I should have. And I had to consolidate all these things. And after 6 months or a year, I'd sit down and I'd say, hell, I'll never do it. Well, what's the use? But then that word painstaking would come back in my mind. And I just kept on doing it. It says we will be amazed before we are halfway through. We are going to know a new freedom and a new happiness. We will not regret the past nor wish to shut the door on it. We will comprehend the word serenity and we will know peace. No matter how far down the scale we have gone, we will see how our experience can benefit others. That feeling of uselessness and self-pity will disappear. We will lose interest in selfish things and gain interest in our fellows. Self-seeking will slip away. Our whole attitude and outlook upon life will change. Fear of people and of economic insecurity will leave us. We will intuitively know how to handle situations which used to baffle us. And that's anything. You know, there was a time when people used to say hello to me and I was stuck for an answer, but I know how to handle that now. You know. We will suddenly realize that God is doing for us what we could never do for ourselves, and I like that one. And I was thinking about that one day, and something occurred. Something happened to me. I was thinking along the lines that I hear people tell us that sobriety is a gift. And I had to ask myself a question. I says, if it's a gift, it's a gift from who? And I says, I guess it's a gift from God. And if it's a gift from God, it's got to be a good gift. And if it's a gift from God, the gift has got to be the same all the time. In other words, the gift ain't no better today than it was yesterday, and it ain't going to be no better tomorrow than it is today. And if it's a gift from God, it's got to be the same for everybody, because God don't play favorites. I guess what I'm trying to say is that sobriety is a gift. And it's my ability to accept and receive God's help that's going to determine the quality of my sobriety. You know, I have a little boy at home that's 6 years old. And he wanted a bicycle. He wanted a bicycle more than anything in the world. So one day I was coming home from work and I bought him a bicycle, a racing type bicycle. And I got home and I took it out the trunk and he's looked at it and his eyes opened up and he just come running and he just hopped on that bicycle and he started riding and he looked over his shoulder and he says, "Thanks, Dad." Now that's the way to accept a gift. But God, you know, has probably got the greatest gift that the old alcoholic can want. It's called sobriety. And then what do we do with it? God says, here. And we kind of look at it from the top, and we kind of look at it from underneath, and we poke it and feel it and kick it. We just don't know. If it is a gift, just take it. It's good. It's good. And step 10, I do because it's there. I don't like admitting when I'm wrong. But when I do, if I look back, I find that maybe I didn't handle the situation correctly. And the next time that it happens, maybe I'll be able to do it that much better, just a little bit better. And I do a little meditating. And what I meditate about mostly is God. What He is like today, what He was always like, and what He always will be like. And that really turns me on. And I like to share something with you because you're such a good bunch to share things with that I discovered one day. Because I think that moments of meditation are times of discovery. I was kind of sitting down, and that's the way to meditate, sitting down. That's how you do it. And something occurred to me. That God wasn't punishing, that God wasn't loving, that God wasn't forgiving, but that God was forgiveness, and that God was love. And I do a little praying. I pray for the knowledge of God's will for me. And being the powerless individual that I am, I have to say that sometimes I can't do it. That I can't do it by myself. And ask for the power to carry it out. But I know one thing, that today I am able to live in unity with this God that I'm talking about. And when I live in unity with God, the God of love, I don't have any choice but to love you people. And there's a man sitting in this room that I had occasion to spend a weekend with. And he told me that love to him meant action. So that when I live in unity with this God, I have no choice but to be of service to you people, to my fellow men in general. My people at work, the people I work with, the people we do work for. Just there to be of service, to offer a service. And if they want it, fine. If they don't, that's good too. And that's a nice way to go to work. And my family, I love them, so I do things for them. And the people in Alcoholics Anonymous, I do things for, because I love them. The sobriety isn't the abstinence from drink alone, it's more than that. Sobriety isn't a AA club room, it's more than that. Sobriety, or Alcoholics Anonymous, is a way of life. It says that we tried to carry this message. How am I doing? I can remember early in my sobriety I was very enthused about this, and I still am, and that's good. And I got a phone call one night, and there's a little drunk that wanted to get sober, and he was staying up drinking at one of the bars in our city. So I drove down and I picked him up, and I drove around with him a little while in the car, and we'd stop occasionally, and I'd open the door and lean him out, and he'd puke, and then I'd pull him back in, and we'd travel. And we did this for a little while, and when I thought that he'd puked everything that there was to puke and there weren't no more, I took him home with me. And I sat him down in one chair, and I sat across, and I gave him a pitch about Alcoholics Anonymous like you've never heard in your life. I was sure that if anybody would have talked to me like that 10 years ago, I would have quit drinking right then and never drank again. That's how good it was. And after a little while, I put him back in the car, and we drove him back to his car, and we were going to go to a meeting the next day. And on the way home, I was thinking, and I was having visions of him flowering and blossoming with me in Alcoholics Anonymous. And then I got a thought, and I kind of chased it out. And it kept coming back, and I chased it out, and finally I says, darn it. And I turned around, and I drove back to his car, and I walked into this bar, and there was my friend having a drink. And I had to have a look at this word, try. You see, I'm not the message, I'm not the Messiah. You've got that much going for you already. But we have to try, and our book tells us to. In the chapter called The Family Afterward, it says, cling to the thought that in God's hands, the dark past is the greatest possession that you have. The key to life and happiness for others. Not just for me, but for others. With it, you can avert death and misery for them. So it's kind of serious. We have a lot of fun doing it, but it's kind of a serious business. And I can remember walking down the street one day. And we have a hotel back home called the Mall. It's right downtown, and it was a nice day like it is today, and it was the middle of the afternoon. I got on the corner there, and there was this old fellow that was lying there, and his face was all bashed in because I guess he'd been falling into buildings and doors and whatnot the way that drunks do. And his face was all marred. And he was dirty, and he hadn't shaved, and he was passed out right in the middle of the sidewalk. And to make matters worse, he had kind of peed himself, you know. And we were at the red light, and people kind of looked down, and they found that disgusting. They said, look at that drunk. Isn't that horrible? And I looked at him, and I kind of wish I could have picked him right up. And I kind of wish that I could have maybe put my arm around him and given him a little hug. And I kind of wish I could have told him the same thing that people told me, that, you know, it doesn't have to be like that. There's a better way to live, one day at a time. Because what I saw there is, I don't know, what I was thinking of, I guess, that there, but for the grace of God go I. I don't have any trouble seeing myself lying on a sidewalk, see? And it says we try to practice these principles in all our affairs. Well, I think the principles that I got from the 12 steps and the 12 traditions of Alcoholics Anonymous, I try to practice one day at a time. And in closing, I'd like to read to you something from our book, because our book is much better at saying things than I am. And it's from the chapter called The Vision for You. And it kind of describes the way that I felt when I got to Alcoholics Anonymous. And if you think back, it might describe the way that you felt when you got to Alcoholics Anonymous. And maybe it describes the way that somebody feels here today. But it goes on to describe what it's like today for many of us, and what it's like for anybody that fulfills the conditions for sobriety. It says, we have shown you how we got out from under. You say, yes, I'm willing. But am I to be consigned to a life where I shall be stupid, boring, and glum, like some righteous people I see? I know I must get along without liquor, but how can I? Have you a sufficient substitute? Then the book goes on to say, it says, yes, there is a substitute, and it is vastly more than that. It is a fellowship in Alcoholics Anonymous. There you will find release from care, toil, and worry. Your imagination will be fired. Life will mean something at last. The most satisfactory years of your existence lie ahead. It's hard to be contented when you got something like that staring you in the face. But I'm enthused about it. Thus we find the fellowship, and so will you. How is that to come about, you ask? We talk about faith in Alcoholics Anonymous, and I guess that faith is the means or the way that united me with a higher power. But this higher power, God, as I understand him, needs tools to work with. And I think that the fellowship, all you people in Alcoholics Anonymous, are the tools that he works with. They were in my case. And then the book goes on to say, where am I to find these people? Well, if you're looking, you're going to find them. Hell, it's my first time in Denver, and I found a whole bunch of you. In closing, I'd like to tell you that I love you. God bless, and keep on trudging.
By some of the people who are here this morning to share with you the sort of plan, if you can call it that we follow. And it's really so very simple that it hardly bears talking about, because the plan we follow is all set out for us here in the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous. Well, this one has a little different cover on it, but it's the same book. I do that just to protect it because I carry it with me wherever I go. We start at the beginning, as Mac indicated, right at the outside cover, as a matter of fact, where it points out to us that this is the basic text of our fellowship. So we learn right away that this is a textbook, and it's not a storybook or some other kind of a book, historical novel or something like that. And of course, textbooks are meant to be studied, so we try to study it and follow it. And we discover very rapidly that there's a plan of recovery set out in the book that is very well thought out, and amazing things happen when we follow that plan. We don't only get sober, but we get recovery, which of course distinguishes, in my mind, Alcoholics Anonymous from any other organization I've ever heard of. Because every other place I went, they always wanted to treat me. Those psycho wards that I landed up in, they treated me. And those retreat houses that I went to get holy. Did you ever get asked to leave a retreat house? I wanted to unload one morning. I called in, you had an option. You could go to confession, or you could ask for the padre to come to your room and have it, head on, eyeball to eyeball. And I'm a drunk. I wouldn't settle for anything second rate. I wanted the guy to come to my room. I was going to give him the full treatment, see? And I was in really good shape that morning. By the time he got there, I'm on my knees and I'm blubbering and I'm crossing myself frontwards and backwards. And he took a look at me and said, "Tom, I really don't think you're too well. I think you should go home for a rest." I don't know why anybody would think it would be a good idea to go home from a retreat house for a rest. That's what I went there for in the first place. Anyway, that's how it was. We noticed some years ago in traveling around the various groups in our districts and in our areas that alcoholics as a group don't read very well. They're lousy readers. We have more damn literature than any other organization on the face of the earth, and hell, we don't read it. We got a Grapevine that's a fantastic publication, and less than 10% of our membership buy it. Isn't that great? Did you know that? How many times have you heard people stand up and say, "We got 800,000. And if you stick around long enough, we got 1 million before the day's over." But the circulation figures of the Grapevine haven't changed at all since morning. If you don't believe me, go up to the GSO office and ask them what the circulation is. It's about 80,000. So if we got 800,000, about 10% read it. That's nothing to brag about, I don't think. So the idea came across that we would read the book together. So we attend this Sunday morning group. Ours is 9:30. Mac gets his up a little earlier. I don't know why. They go at 8:30. And we read the book. We have a reader, guy who's appointed as the reader, and that's his job, and that's all he does. Whatever we're going to cover that morning, he reads it. And everybody brings their book with them. Now, here's an amazing thing. When I sit and read my book at home, it says one thing. And by God, when I go up to that meeting and sit down and somebody else reads it to me, it says something else. Isn't that amazing? See? I have a friend in Alcoholics Anonymous who tells me that there is no such thing as the meaning of a word. No such thing. Isn't that great? You think about that. That's fabulous. That just turns me on, baby. See, what it means when you say it, when you read it out of that book, and I get it here and I get it here, is totally different than the intellectual process of reading and trying to assimilate. That's cold, that's intellectual, and that's not Alcoholics Anonymous. It's a sharing thing, and it's you handing that word to me with something added, something from you, something from the group. We get a feeling in that Sunday morning meeting that I've never seen in any other meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous. It's an intense thing. And because we do everything together and discuss everything together, it makes it possible for that new guy or that new gal to start losing that fear that grips us when we come to step 3. The reason we don't want to do step 3 and really, really do it the way it is set out in the book is not because we can't read and can't intellectualize and can't understand what it's saying. It's because we're paralyzed with fear and we're scared as hell. You know, something might fall on us. It won't. We'll be fine. And it's the same in step 4. You can publish all the guides in the world and they're not going to do your step 4 for you. So we tell our members that it's so important. Step 4 is so important. Take the day off if you got it. Give up a day's pay if you got it. It's the most important investment you will ever make in your life. And do your step 4. And part of the step 4, as far as we're concerned, is making the appointment to do step 5. We've had people in our group with 10-year sobriety who have never done step 4 and 5. We've had guys with 19-year sobriety sit in our group and hear that chapter read, the family afterward, with tears in their eyes. Never heard it, never read it. We get people who have never read the chapter to the agnostic because they're not agnostic. Isn't that great? So we do it, and we share it, and really, really good things happen. We take it in easy stages. We don't push anybody or rush anybody too much. Give people a chance to come along. We don't go to step 5, though, until everyone has their step 4 done. And if they don't know where to go for a step 5, we're not above making a suggestion or two. We'll even make an appointment and drive them down there if they're having trouble finding the place. Because we know how important it is. And we know what happens as a result of it. A great, great thing happens. We use the 7-5 checklist. You don't call it that, but we call it that in our group. It's on page 75. That's one reason why we call it the 7-5 checklist. And there are 7 points set out in that checklist, and you do it after step 5. It says these are the things that you're supposed to get out of step 5. Beginning of a spiritual experience. So we just, each one for himself, runs through that, and if that's not what you're getting, then we go back and do it again. Because we've come to realize the power in that step. We've seen what has happened to people as a result of it. And I want to give you just 2 really quick examples. How are we doing? We have lots of time. Okay, these are 2 people who are in our group. First one, a guy by the name of Chuck, in the real estate business. Came to see me one day because I owed him a part of a commission which I had forgotten totally. And he wanted to get it, and I asked him, how things were, and he said, not too good. And he started telling me what had happened to him. He had a couple of heart attacks, and things weren't going along so well, and the longer he went in the story, the sadder it got for him. And he was telling me this sad story with tears in his eyes, and how bad things were and how bad things had been and all that. And I asked him how he was getting along in that church, and he told me that he had decided to leave it. He had been on their board of directors or whatever it is. And I looked at him, and he's waiting, for me to lay it on him and say, God, Chuck, that's too bad. Gee, you really have had it tough, haven't you? But I didn't say that. I looked at him and I said, Chuck, there's not a damn thing wrong with your heart. Nothing wrong with your heart. Did you have it checked? He said, yes, I had it checked. I said, what do the EEG say and the EKG say? And he said, well, everything's normal. They can't seem to find anything wrong, but I've been there a couple times. Well, I suggested to him it was his head. And he started missing meetings and all that sort of thing. So we got him into our Sunday morning group. We didn't ask him to write his name down. I went and wrote it down for him. And we got him there. Now that's about 6-7 months ago. And Chuck's back to work. He's lost a little weight. He's looking good. He's happy. Because in this book it says we are sure that God wants us to be joyous, happy, and free. And we believe that. Because we don't think if you miss 4, there's any way you're going to do 5, and we don't think if you miss 2, there's any way you're going to do 6, 7, 8, or 9. And we begin to see the plan, we begin to see the relationship between self and God and others throughout this program. We see that step 1 deals with self, and that step 2 deals with God, like Janice says, it's not a matter of returning to sanity nearly as much as it is to recognize the power of God, the power of this in our lives, this force, creative force in our lives. And then others in step 3, turning my will and my life over to the care of, service, others. And then the steps begin to come in pairs, 4 and 5, the preparation and the execution, 6 and 7, the preparation and the execution, 8 and 9, the preparation and the execution. But the same pattern persists. 4 and 5 is removal of self, getting me out of the way. 6 and 7, God, the relationship. 8 and 9, others, making the relationship with others. And 10, 11, 12, same thing. 10, self, and the removal thereof. 11, God, and 12 others, all others. And we're struck and electrified by the beauty of this program, by the tremendous plan that is behind it all. And we're talking about recovery, not treatment. A way to live and handle life successfully, joyfully, in freedom. Fantastic. And it's a simple thing. All we do is share that book and share each other and do it together in love. It's a fun thing. It's a fun thing. And it's the greatest thing in the world that has ever happened to me. And I'm so grateful to be here this morning. I'm so grateful to have had the opportunity to have shared this meeting with these fantastic people who are with me here and with all of you. And I love you all. God bless you. Thank you.